want kicking things out of orbit.
Oh my gosh!
One of the greatest fighters.
John Jones beat every champion pretty much never lived.
If Khabib gets his hands on McGregor, it's gonna be a bad night.
Let's get into it. And welcome back to another episode of This Week in MMA. And if this is the first time you've joined us for the show, we are back and in action with really the one that got us to the dance. This is where we started Fight Night Picks off. As always, one half of your host, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP, Matt Allen as well on the respective socials at Matt Allen FNP. And Matt, I've always loved the show. It's a little bit interview, it's a little bit general studies. Now we're getting into odd picks and predictions that we don't normally do with the full UFC card. So there's a lot to really digest from a show like this. I love it. I'm so glad to be back with it and bringing it in weekly. What are you thinking this week?
It's an exciting week. There's a lot of MMA going on, really just around the world, not just UFC. We've got Bellator. There's one championship, I guess, tonight, so won't really get the chance to talk about that much by the time this goes out. But there's a lot of really exciting things going on in the MMA world this week.
Awesome interviews out there on the channel, and we have some big ones for UFC on ABC2. Sasha Platnikov, who's kicking off the card against Impa Kasang, and I had a great conversation with JHK MMA. We also had Joe Selecki. A shame that Kaldakis is out of his fight against Aliaskhab Khaziriev, and that's a difficult one to pronounce. And then we have another great one with Jack Shore, who's taking on Hunter Azure. And we're going to hear from Jack later on in this show. But we also have another interview from Bellator 256 with Nathan Garib, who has his hands full in his promotional debut against Cody Loss. So some great stuff to look forward to. Also, this week, make sure you check out FightNightPicks.com. There's some great stuff over there, including the shop. We've got the Under Armour Fight Night Picks shirts. Matt's got the great baseball jersey
underneath. This is how much I trust the product. I'll wear it underneath the sweater.
That's dedication, the MLG jerseys, and all sorts of great stuff over there on the sites. So make sure you check it out, FightNightPicks.com. Matt, I love this show, so let's get into my favorite segment. This one's called the Twitter Purge.
It's time for the Twitter Purge.
All right, Matt, we're kicking off the Twitter Purge with one of the biggest news stories that just continues to kind of pop up, and we have current bantamweight champ Aljamain Sterling. It doesn't look like he's going to be getting back into action anytime soon. There was the opportunity where the rematch was offered for May 15th, and it seems like Aljamain Sterling turned it down. Now, it's been spun into a lot of different news stories, but realistically, he declined the rematch just a week after that fight had happened. And listen, I don't know if you've ever been kneed in the head. I got kneed in the head one time in high school on a linoleum floor. It hurt for a while. It really did. So you need some time to clear your thoughts. But overall, it seems like injuries and, listen, just the overall sour taste in Sterling's mouth has really affected the fact that this fight probably will take a long time to make up. And maybe we get some different fights in the interim. We had a great talking point from our own JHK MMA in the interview with Jack Shore about this exact fight. So I'd really love to hear Jack's thoughts about it.
Bantamweight division, UFC 259. I know you were watching that fight, the title fight between Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan. Sterling won the bantamweight title via DQ. What did you think of the whole illegal knee ordeal and the belt changing hands?
Yeah, it was a crazy one, wasn't it? Aljamain started so strong, and then it looked as if Yan was going to come on and get him out of there late, and then that one mistake sort of cost him it all. I mean, it's a difficult situation. Obviously, I don't think for a minute that Aljamain was sort of, faking or anything like that. I think he was genuinely hurt, and I'm surprised they put it on him to decide if he wanted to continue or not, because I feel like the ref should have made the call, the ref and the doctor, because most fighters are gonna say they can carry on. But it's one of them. I mean, you don't ever want to see someone win the belt by DQ, but at the same time, if you bring in a rule that you can't win the belt by DQ, who's to stop a champion who's losing 4 rounds getting himself disqualified on purpose in the 5th? So it's a tough situation, definitely. I mean, the only real answer I can think of would be let's just run it back as soon as they can, and forget the first fight even happened.
And Matt, really great to hear from Jack Shore competing this weekend against Hunter Azure at UFC Vegas 23, ABC 2, whatever it might be. But this is such a complex issue where Sterling had the injuries, and now it seems like he wants to heal up because he really hasn't had time to do so in his entire pro MMA career. It's one of those things that we've seen from some champions before, but it really is an odd spot. And I almost liken this, and it's starting to get sour. Like, the fans aren't really loving it. It's holding up the division. we're getting into Jermaine Durand-y territory a little bit.
People hate Aljamain Sterling, and here's the thing. It's not all justified. Now, I do understand some of the moves he's made since he has become champ has left a sour taste in some people's mouth. People don't like the fact that he does pose with the belt. People didn't like the fact... Well, first of all, people didn't like the way that him and Matt Serra kind of departed, and that was kind of a weird story just going into that fight for beginners. So people already weren't really on Aljamain Sterling's side. Then I don't want to say he takes the easy way out, but in boxing, that's what people say. When people do win the title or defend the title in just uncharacteristic manners, let's say, people do go after them. Oh, you wanted the easy way out. You're not a real fighter. I'm pretty sure Aljamain Sterling's a real fighter. We've seen him in there with other killers. He fought Corey Sandhagen. He choked him out in like a minute 30. So Aljamain Sterling is a real fighter. It just is really weird because you do see this storyline now of, oh, I don't really want to fight Petr Yan. And he was even in interviews prior to this one saying, oh, well, if Yan was in any other sport, he'd be suspended. It is a little bit weird, and it does look like Aljo's ducking, but I do think that this has been his timeline. We've seen this before from fighters, at least on their ascension towards a title shot, put injuries to the side. Okay, I'm going to fight every 3 months, every 4 months. I just want to get wins till I get up to that title shot. And a lot of fighters, whether they win or lose, they will take a little bit of time off after they do win or lose that belt. Poirier is an example that I always think of. He had the hip surgery after he fought Khabib. He thought that he should get that injury looked after before the fight, but he thought, I'll fight for the title, I'll look after that, and then I'll take a little bit of time off. The only difference was Poirier, if he had beat Khabib, let's say Khabib kneed him in the head and he was down, he would have still needed that time off. So for Sterling, I do see where a lot of this hate is coming from. I do feel like it is unjustified. It's just the timeline doesn't really match up the proper way. And here's the biggest loser out of all this. It's the fans. Because I think we can both agree. The bantamweight division in the UFC is probably the hottest division in sports right now. And this just makes for a bigger logjam in what should be the most exciting division in the UFC.
And I mean, we'll have to see what happens because you have to look at the top. You've got Yan that, of course, doesn't have a fight booked at this point in time. You've got Sandhagen taking on Dillashaw. There's a lot of really marquee matchups up there. I mean, we saw Sean O'Malley. All of a sudden, he's back up into the picture of the top 15 after the big win over Thomas Almeida. You got Dominic Cruz with the big win over Casey Kenny. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But listen, I mean, from a personal perspective, I'd love to see the rematch. It's just a shame that if Sterling's out for 6 to 9 months, maybe they slap an interim belt on the line and we see a fight there. Would you be surprised if we didn't get a fight like that?
I'd love to see a Petr Yan versus the winner of that. I guess not Aljamain. The Corey Sandhagen TJ Dillashaw fight. TJ versus Yan would be insane. Don't want to give a prediction away, but I feel like that's a long night for TJ. And then Sandhagen versus Yan would also be a very fun fight because the only roadblock we've seen Corey Sandhagen have is against a grappler, and against every other guy who strikes them, he normally ends up knocking them out in spectacular fashion. So any version of those fights I think would be absolutely amazing.
We'll have to see what happens, but it should be a really interesting road to our next bantamweight title fight. It's official. You can pick up a lot of $5 Reebok t-shirts on the UFC store now. And we have the new Venum deal. Now, listen, they went out on a total social media blitz. I'm sure you've seen or heard about this somewhere. And if you haven't yet, well, apparently I'm doing Venum's bidding for them, not a sponsor. But you look at it, Matt, and we have all new fight kits. If you go to the UFC social media and their Twitter, every single post that's out there, look at this new Venum kit. You've got Marvin Vettori with the new shorts on. You've got all of the fighters lining up. I even saw Nina Ansaroff wearing the top and the bottoms of the Venum kit. And listen, I gotta say, it's sharp enough looking stuff. I wanted to get the overall take because up in front of us, and you can't see this on screen, we have the Venum website in front of us. It's venum.ca. I'm looking at some of these models, and odd choices. I mean, they've got Kay Hansen on here. Devin Clark's the one repping some of the stuff. I saw Cyril Gahn on there as well, and I like it. It's great to see some different athletes represented than just the champions or some of the really big names. But we have it for UFC highlights. A Venum Authentic Fight Night men's walkout jersey. $97 Canadian. UFC Venum Authentic Fight Night men's walkout hoodie. $176. Who the hell's gonna pay for this stuff?
I don't know why you're so outraged. Nobody. Like, no one. You've never seen anybody ever walking down the street with a Reebok one of these in the first place. So what makes you think Venum? Oh, wow. All of a sudden, you're going to see people who were buying Affliction t-shirts and now buying Venum fight kits. Like, I don't get the outrage. It looks the exact same as the Reebok stuff. To me, I gotta be honest, it's not that big of a story. They pay the athletes relatively the same as what Reebok did. There's a slight increase, but if you actually do the inflation amounts, it equals to pretty much the exact same. I don't think this is much of a story, to be that honest. The clothes are very similar to what Reebok threw out there, and this is my problem, actually. If I was Venum, I would make everything look completely opposite, because the way I looked at it in my head was, more people probably know the brand Reebok than they do the UFC. more people know what the UFC is than they do Venum. So it's kind of the opposite way. It's the opposite way around. So the casual fan or the audience member who might not watch every single UFC event and who might not know the actual apparel deals of the company, they're going to look at this and still think Reebok does their clothes. That's my big thing. If you're Venum and you are kind of this small fish in what is a big pond in the apparel industry, why wouldn't you really try to set yourself apart and really go unique? Make everything as Venum authentic or just original as you can. That's what I would have done if I was them, because I look at the shorts and yeah, there's fangs on them, but other than that, they're the same color patterns. The black lines are pretty much in the same part. It's just Reebok, just with a new name on top.
And I mean, diving more and more into it, t-shirts for $50, hoodies for $90. It is really expensive gear. The one thing I will say, and we'll flip it on its head, it's all really expensive, and it's expensive to me. I'm wearing a Roots of Fight shirt, so are you. It'd be cool to see Roots of Fight represented, but I look at this Venum stuff, and you got to consider it from a fighter's perspective. They must be happy to have a fight company actually designing and coming out with these clothes rather than just your average everyday apparel company.
Really? I'd no. Because here's the thing: if you're an athlete, you're getting shoes. You're getting a lot of things that.
Oh,
Venum
they're still doing the Reebok shoes.
Well, that's what doesn't make any sense to me then. So what does Venum even do? So this is my whole point. Venum only makes sweatpants and sweaters for the fighters now.
Rash guards.
I don't think the fighters care that much. I don't think they're going home being like, yeah, maybe the next time I go to the UFC Fighters Retreat, we'll get a 50% off scratch off for Venum, not Reebok this time. It's just ridiculous. Like, I don't think this is that big of a deal, and I might be in the minority in this, but it's a new clothing brand. The fighters still don't make that much money off it, which is the real issue. So to me, it's not that big of a deal. The UFC is just getting paid from another company now.
So, Matt, Russian associate of the Stars, Rizvan Magomedov, had a big interview with RT Sport. And I saw this one on Reddit, and I really wanted to kind of talk about it because I haven't seen it talked about all that much. And listen, you might know Rizvan Magomedov from his time at UFC 229, inciting a little bit of a brawl, kind of. And you might know him from, again, managing or kind of dealing with some of the sport's biggest stars. But two big stars that he's directly involved with, Islam Makhachev, and then the man himself. Really, could you call him MMA's boogeyman? Because when's he going to fight? Zabit Magomedsharipov. It's looking like Islam Makhachev's going to have a return in July. And we've already seen some bigger fights booked for July. And we're just getting into April at this point. And for Zabit, it looks like he's going to be competing sometime this summer. And I know a lot of MMA fans are really excited about that. You saw Islam Makhachev his last time out after a fairly long layoff look amazing against Drew Dober. Absolutely dominate that fight. And for Zabit, his last time out, he faced some of the most adversity we've ever seen him face. And it's a shame that the guy he fought is still in concussion protocol after his fight with Max Holloway. So for Zabit, where I really want to jump off with it is, we haven't seen him fight in forever. And this featherweight division is a weird one because there's fans out there, and I see you in the YouTube community tab especially, that don't give a rat's behind about our co-main event this weekend. Arnold Allen, Sadiq Youssef, ranked featherweights. But when we're talking about Zabit Magomedsharipov, this guy's such a talent where he puts on exciting fights, and the people have really rallied around him. What are you looking for in a Zabit rematch, and who could you maybe see him possibly matched up with if he comes back this summer?
I'm glad you're asking world-renowned Zabit Magomedsharipov superfan Matt Allen. It's interesting because for me, the only thing I care about with Zabit is that his next fight has to be a 5-round atmosphere. I know we've seen him in 3-round main events, if you will, whatever he did with Calvin Kattar. There's always just something when Zabit is fighting. I need to see him in there against a top 10 fighter in a 5-round atmosphere. Personally, I think about Dane Ige. I do know he's fighting the Korean Zombie coming up, but I think that would have been a really fun fight. With Josh Emmett, too. Josh Emmett's another interesting case, because if you look back at his fight against Shane Burgos, arguably fight of the year last year, but he did suffer an ACL injury, and no one really knows when the timetable is for his return. But I personally would love to see 5 rounds of Josh Emmett versus Zabit, because you really have to ask yourself, how long can Zabit keep his cardio together until he does tire out? Because let's say he starts to get tired at the end of the 3rd round, like we've seen him do in the past. Josh Emmett's the last guy you want to be locked in a cage with if you're starting to fatigue, and he's a guy that we know can carry his power late into a fight, into that 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. So personally, that would be a matchup that I'd be really excited to see.
To me, I want to see the firefight that was originally booked for last August. I mean, the fight between Yair Rodriguez and Zabit, and unfortunately, if you go onto the Tapologies, they have it listed as Yair Rodriguez fractured ankle. Now, I've seen him in pictures. He's trained it a little bit. It seems like the BMF Ranch with Daniel Rodriguez and Donald Cerrone. And we know that he's been training. Now, the one thing that we don't know about Yair is that whole Dana White quotable back at the end of last year where it was, yeah, have we talked about this kid?
Oh no, we do know about it.
Oh,
He
what
just
is it?
didn't tell where he didn't
No,
tell
I
you
didn't tell you
where it
Sada,
was. But it was a 4-month suspension that's over now.
All right, so it's over now. Make that fight. That is one of the most exciting fights that we
It
can
would
get
be.
in this division. And again, are both guys 5-round cardio kings? Well, Yair's been in 5-round fights. And unfortunately for Jeremy Stevens, the second of the 5-round fights ended quite quickly. So I'd love to see that fight rebooked once more. A 5-round atmosphere. Maybe you have it in Russia. Maybe you go to Abu Dhabi.
Be a fun fight.
It would be a great one. For me, that is such a big one. But then we flip it over to Islam Makhachev, and a guy that had such an impressive performance over Drew Dober. And we've really heard a lot of names thrown out there before. If we're talking about July, now I got to throw this one to you, and I'm going to softball it, put it right on a tee. You can knock it out of the park. I still think the Dos Anjos fight is a fight to make, and you make that a fight night main event.
It's really hard to disagree with that. The only other opponent you might look towards would be Beneil Dariush. Now, I understand he's fighting Tony Ferguson, but if that fight wasn't put together, I would think those two would make for a very fun matchup. Two boogeymen, if you will, of this division. But yeah, I think RDA versus Islam Makhachev is the play. They were originally booked to fight in a 5-round main event. Make that 5 rounds again, because here's the thing. I need to see prospects fight in a 5-round fight before I think they can win a title. That's just a rule I have. Maybe they don't win every 5-round fight going the distance. Maybe not all of them make it 25 minutes, but they have to be in a 25-minute ready training camp, if that makes any sense. So for Makhachev and for Magomedsharipov, I need to see 25-minute fights out of both those guys.
Got to see 25 minutes, too, of Russia's biggest stars, hopefully getting back in the octagon this summer. I'm really looking forward to it, Matt. And now we got to go with really what everybody knows from Fight Night Picks. We have Bellator 256 coming up this weekend. There's all kinds of great fights, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But what we've been doing, some breakdowns, previews, and predictions. For our co-main event, you have Liz the Gorilla Carmouche taking on Vanessa Porto, true legend of the sport. And then you have the rematch between Ryan Bader and Lyoto Machida. So Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Big time matchup in our co-main event this weekend at women's flyweight. We have a couple of fighters that you probably recognize. The Gorilla, Liz Carmouche, taking on former Invicta flyweight champ Vanessa Porto. And Matt, I love the matchup. Okay. These are two gritty veterans of the sport, both 37 years of age. And for Liz Carmouche, a very early adopter in the Invicta FC promotion. We can talk about her career. She's faced some of the best competition in the world, but let's talk about some of Carmouche's wins. She's beaten Valentina Shevchenko by finish, Jessica Andrade by finish. She has wins over Lauren Murphy, Caitlin Chookagian, Jennifer Maia, and in her Bellator debut, finished Deanna Bennett, somebody that Invicta fans definitely know, but a gritty veteran and another true pioneer of the sport. We look the other way. For Vanessa Porto, a fighter that maybe some people don't focus on, 30 professional fights. She's faced some of the biggest names in MMA. A win and a loss against Roxanne Modafferi. She's faced Amanda Nunes, Chris Cyborg in the past, as well as Jennifer Maia. Again, the former Invicta champ. She's on a 4-fight win streak. We haven't seen Porto in about a year and a half, so it's been a little bit with Carmouche, like I said. She's a little bit more fresh. But both of these women, very game opponents. For Carmouche, she's a 7th-ranked pound-for-pound woman with Bellator right now. She's the number 2 ranked flyweight behind her teammate, number 1, Alima Lay McFarland. And then, of course, you have your champion, Juliana Velasquez. A lot of people thinking that maybe the winner of this fight gets an opportunity to fight Velasquez for the belt. Will it be USA-Brazil again, or will we have an all-Brazilian matchup for the title? That remains to be seen. I love this matchup, though, Matt, stylistically. And Vanessa Porto, in an interview with Sherdog she did this week, she doesn't want you to call this a clash of styles stylistically. This is a clash of styles.
It really is, but I do think this is going to be a very fun fight because you have two fighters who have been there and done that in their MMA careers. Two really legends of the sport, because for Vanessa Porto, you had mentioned just the list of women who she's run through. You look at her record pre-2010, a lot of those fighters are still relevant today. You talk about the Amanda Nunes of the world, the Cyborgs of the world. Vanessa Porto has been in there with some of the most dangerous women on planet Earth. Now with Liz Carmouche, it's kind of interesting, right? She has her fight against Valentina in the UFC after her win. One of the weirdest fights in UFC history. Just not a lot of anything happened, really. Of course, when Valentina did let her hands go, she was able to land on Liz Carmouche. And this is going to be interesting about this fight, because a lot of the times, and I will say, in women's MMA, I do think experience is a lot more important than in men's MMA, because experience against high-level competition really will make you better. And for Liz Carmouche, a lot of people forget, she was in the first ever women's title fight in the UFC. She broke Ronda Rousey's jaw with that crazy rear naked choke, and then of course she ended up losing to Rousey, but that's how entrenched Liz Carmouche is really in the MMA history books. So just a really fun fight between these two. For Vanessa Porto, it will be interesting, because you do bring up some of the fighters who she's fought. These fighters have kind of been on opposite trajectories, if you will, through the last couple of years. Because for Vanessa Porto, she really has been winning titles in Invicta, getting better, and she reminds me a little bit, and this is going to be a bit of an exaggeration, but she's had a bit of a Jan Blachowicz resurgence in her last few fights. You see that she isn't just the jiu-jitsu fighter she once was. She now can strike quite a bit better. She has different footwork, I will say. She can get caught up while moving backwards. It's one thing that I don't always love out of Porto. She can move backwards and not get her feet tangled up, but she gets her feet very close together, and it's normally a characteristic that you see of fighters who have been rocked. It's just something that she will get caught up doing in her fights, and if Carmouche fights with a lot of pressure like you know she can do, it's something that Porto might get caught up doing, stumbling over herself or at least moving backwards. But my key to this fight, not to sound like Yanni the Greek, but my key to this fight is pressure. I really do think the fighter moving forward will be the fighter winning, because we know how good Carmouche is with her grappling and her forward offensive, but I don't think Liz Carmouche striking's that bad. I'm going to throw her in with a Jordan Griffin type of a level fighter, where I wish they would strike just a little bit more than they would. I understand her grappling is very good. I understand her jiu-jitsu is very good, but her striking's not bad by any means. And if she can keep fighters at a certain range before taking it to the ground, that's what I really like. Liz Carmouche. Sorry.
And I mean, in this fight, you look at it, and for Vanessa Porto, last time out was in November of 2019. It's been a lengthy layoff. She fought Karina Rodriguez. She won by unanimous decision. That was supposed to be for the belt. Rodriguez weighed in way over the limit. So, again, 4-fight win streak. You like the wins. Melania Tiduva, you know her. Really butchered the name. You've got Mariana Moraes, Pearl Gonzalez, and then Rodriguez as well. It's an interesting matchup, again, because if you look at Vanessa Porto and the way she fights, you talked about it, the way that she steps in. If she blitzes a fighter, she really causes them issues. And when she gets the fight to the mat, very positionally sound, to where she's always looking to move into an opportunity where she can rack up a submission. And again, that Pearl Gonzalez fight, it was a very close one. It's a technical decision, a legal shot at one point, and then you get the decision. But a very, very good fight, and a good barometer as to what Vanessa Porto can bring into the cage. For Liz Carmouche, we have the accurate numbers because you can get them from the UFC stat website. But I went with all-time women's bantamweight numbers and then tacked on a little bit. This is absolutely crazy. Number 2 all-time for significant strike defense at 65.8%. Number 3 for takedowns landed at 15. She's also landed 10 more at flyweight. That's insane. Liz Carmouche, very takedown heavy. But the thing that you like out of Carmouche is that her wrestling's very good and her jiu-jitsu is very good. Two things that, especially at bantamweight women's flyweight, you don't always see those two jive.
No, exactly. And for Carmouche, again, it's because she is so experienced. She's been in there with some of the best fighters, really, of all time. And she's learned from all those experiences. Here's the other thing. I don't think we're dealing with two fighters on the decline necessarily. I just think we're dealing with two fighters who are at a point in their career where they have a lot of experience. And when you fought the best of the best, like both these two women have throughout your career, you're going to have some losses on your way. But that's the best thing about MMA. It's not like boxing. You can lose and still get better because of it, and I think both of these fighters have been on that trajectory.
And I mean, the big point for Vanessa Porto coming into this one, signed a 4-fight contract with Bellator, so it's not just a one and done. Again, both these women just turned 37. If we have a look at Tapology, Matt, 680 total votes, 87% Carmouche, 90% by decision. If we look at the odds, Carmouche open to minus 185 favorite. She's now minus 178. For Porto, open a plus 155, now at a plus 146. So maybe it's a little bit of UFC notoriety, some of the fights, some of the wins. It is a great matchup. What are your final thoughts on this one?
So it will be interesting. And again, I do really think pressure is going to be key for the winner if it is Porto or Carmouche. But my problem is Vanessa Porto can get backed up. Whereas Liz Carmouche, she rarely does back up unless you do hit her with a big strike. You really have to earn her respect for her to start taking a step back. Whereas Porto can give up space sometimes. And for Carmouche, I'm not not saying make this a boring fight per se, but she will have to incorporate her wrestling. I see a lot of her wrestling up against the cage, takedowns, have Porto kind of get back up to her feet, rinse and repeat, because I do think Carmouche has the cardio edge out of these two fighters, and if she's the one making Porto work and not the other way around, I like Carmouche via decision.
I like Carmouche for all of those reasons. Again, that 10th planet connection, you see those crazy dead orchard chokes that Ali Malay will do, but listen, Liz Carmouche, you want to see somebody that's very adept on the ground. You look at it, the connection with Richie Martinez. You also have Eddie Bravo as well. And if you look at it for Vanessa Porto, you do the research, not out of one of the bigger gyms in the world, but she's carved out such an impressive career.
Oh, yeah.
So for me, I'm going with Carmouche. You're going with the Gorilla to get the win. Love the fight. Great co-main event. We have an awesome main event. The rematch between your former light heavyweight champ and the man himself, the Dragon, Lyoto Machida, in this light heavyweight tournament. Matt, we're going Carmouche. We're really looking forward to the fight. And as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. In our main event of the evening, kicking off the Bellator Light Heavyweight Grand Prix, we have a fight almost 9 years in the making. The rematch between your current heavyweight champ, former light heavyweight champ, Orion Darth Bader, and he's taking on the Dragon, Lyoto Machida. And when we get into MMA, back when we were very, very young, 2008, 2009, it was because of guys like Shogun Hua, John Jones, Chuck Liddell, GSP, and pretty much Lyoto Machida. And it's crazy to see where the sport's gone and the fact that Lyoto Machida is still competing at the age he's at. And if you look at it, coming into this fight, he's going to be 42 and 10 months old, taking on the 37-year-old, almost 38-year-old Ryan Bader. And how the careers that both of these guys have gone on in the last 9 years is absolutely insane. For Ryan Bader, he was always kind of like the bridesmaid, but never the bride with the UFC. He always got the big opportunities, and he always lost. He goes over to Bellator, and boom goes the dynamite. This guy is really something special. And really, only until recently have we seen him lose. And the fight against Vadim Nemkov is just absolutely insane. Before that, his loss was to Anthony Johnson back in 2016. He was on a tidy little win streak, plenty of finishes there. Do we like Ryan Bader fights against Phil Davis?
No, they're terrible.
No, they're terrible. But when he fought King Mo, pretty good. Finished him in 15 seconds. When he fought Fedor, finished him in 35 seconds. Ryan Bader has carved out this second half of a career that's been absolutely insane. And we look opposite him for Lyoto Machida. Did he win all the time with the UFC? No, he didn't. Was it called the Machida era or the Machida error? Well, that's a joke that our own John Franklin loves to talk about. But if you look at what he did leaving the UFC, beating Eric Anders, it was a close one, and finishing Vitor Belfort in classic fashion, since Lyoto's come over to Bellator, wins over Rafael Carvalho, the former longtime middleweight champ. That was a really close fight, and we'll get back to it. Finishing Chael Sonnen, where, I mean, he just kept setting it up and knocking him down. And then 2 split decision losses to the now champ at middleweight, Gegard Mousasi, and Phil Davis by split. It's really interesting to see how Machida's continued to really stay relevant and to put on impressive fights, and I would say competitive fights, at almost 43 years of age.
It's wild that he's still able to have split decisions with guys like Gegard Mousasi and Phil Davis, because personally, going into those fights, I still love Lyoto Machida, full disclosure. I thought he was going to get destroyed by Gegard Mousasi. He arguably won that fight. Now, I don't think he did, but if you made that argument for me, I'd probably just agree with you, because I do really like Machida, but still, he was still having close and competitive fights with Mousasi and Phil Davis, and his last fight against Phil Davis is an interesting one, because you mentioned how we hate watching Phil Davis fight Ryan Bader. Why is that? They both have very similar styles. They're both extremely wrestling heavy, and neither guy has the best stand-up in the world. So when those guys are matched up, you're not going to get an Usman/Covington war where, oh, we are really good wrestlers, but we're both really good at stand-up. You're going to get a very low-volume affair, and that's what they had. Lyoto Machida has this really good way of making fighters defensive without even throwing punches, and I always liken it to Israel Adesanya because people like to mention Adesanya's feints, and oh, he feinted Paulo Costa into not throwing punches. Lyoto Machida was the original guy at doing that, and you watch some of his front kicks and techniques like that, some of the traditional kicks that Machida can throw, he likes to feint with his hips a lot, and even go back and watch the first fight against Ryan Bader. Now, Ryan Bader is a much different fighter than he was 9 years ago, and I think Lyoto Machida was too, but the weird thing about this fight is I thought about, okay, well, when when would have been the prime for these guys to have their second fight, I guess, in Bellator? If they had fought 2 years ago when Ryan Bader was still on top of the world, still champ, I would have said, oh, well, Lyoto Machida's kind of old and Ryan Bader's still in his prime. I honestly think we're dealing with two older fighters at this point, and I think Ryan Bader has kind of aged himself into Machida's category, if that makes any sense. I don't look at Ryan Bader and think, wow, this guy should be the favorite to win this tournament by any means. Whereas, really, if just take away that Nemkov fight, I would say, okay, this is Bader's tournament to lose. So this will be an interesting fight. But the final X's and O's. For Ryan Bader, it's pretty easy. He throws a massive overhand left nowadays, and he likes his wrestling. But other than that overhand left, I like to talk about, oh, this guy has a black belt level submission. Ryan Bader's black belt Muay Thai strike, if you will, is that overhand left. We saw him catch Fedor Emelianenko with it. We saw him catch King Mo with it. He really likes that technique, and he likes starting fights with it. The problem is, when Lyoto Machida's in his southpaw stance, that shot's going to be coming over his far side shoulder, and if Machida can't see it, it's going to put him out early. The only problem is, if Bader doesn't keep his right hand up when he does throw that strike, it's going to leave him wide open to the counter shot of Lyoto Machida, a shot that he should know quite well because that's who he was able to finish Ryan Bader in the first fight. So really just oversimplify this fight. If Bader tries to blitz forward, be that with his wrestling or his striking, he is going to get knocked out. If he can be conservative with his wrestling or his striking, I think he can win this fight. But I think it's a dangerous one for Bader.
It's a really interesting one because for Ryan Bader, 8-man strong, Arizona wrestling, and that's pretty much been A, his calling card, but B, just the overall talking point. Not even just a calling card, like it's almost like a gimmick at this point. You go over to his Instagram and that's all you see is the same guys, the same training. Nothing really changes, and fight in, fight out, it's pretty much the same thing. With Machida, you might get more feints at an advanced stage. You get lower output. That much is true. I mean, that's the thing that I've really kind of seen from Machida, from the Anders fight, from the fight against Belfort, so on and so forth. And since he's been in Bellator. And the weird thing is, you might think, hey, he beat Gegard Mousasi. I'm not going to have a huge argument against it. I look at the fight against Rafael Carvalho. I didn't think Machida won that fight at all. Carvalho broke his nose. I thought Carvalho won 2 of the rounds. Machida was super tentative. And then he comes out against Chael Sonnen, and he goes jump knee. And then Sonnen just does 0 to defend it the next time and the next time, and he gets finished by it. I really have a hard time with this fight, and I'm going to be totally honest and transparent because the odds are silly. Ryan Bader opened a -500 favorite. He's now -308. The odds have shifted tremendously. For Machida, open a +375, now at a +237. And if we have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt, we haven't looked at these. So This is an experience for the viewers and for us. Holy smokes. 771 of them. 86% Bader, 52% by knockout. Lyoto Machida, got to that category where Rockhold finished him. Romero finished him. Like, it started to be, Derek Brunson finished him. This is probably it for Lyoto Machida. And now he's gone out there for fight after fight after fight, and he hasn't been finished. For Bader, though, king of consistency since he came over to Bellator and as he left the UFC. And now, that Nemkov fight exposed that his defense to Vadim Nemkov's kicks was not there.
Okay, this might be a bit of a hot take, but we've talked about how good the second half of Ryan Bader's career has been. Who's the best guy he beat in Bellator? Let's just be really honest, because he
Davis?
beat a big Matt Mitrione, and he barely beat Phil Davis.
You know what? It's probably the Mitrione fight, because it's up a weight class from Bader, and he dominated him.
You're dealing with a fighter known for not being able to defend takedowns against one of the better wrestlers light heavyweights ever seen. I'm just saying, Ryan Bader's really never tested himself in Bellator. He had that weird fight against Czech Congo. Vadim Nemkov was a bit of an unknown coming into that fight, and a lot of people thought Ryan Bader was going to be able to beat him, because Phil Davis had a decent amount of success against Nemkov. It's not like he blew the doors off him. My only hesitation is, I just don't think Ryan Bader's had this magical post-UFC career, if you will. He beat Linton Vassell, who's an okay fighter, but he would not be a ranked light heavyweight in the UFC, and I think that's one of the more shallow divisions in the UFC. I think Linton Vassell's a decent grappler, but not a good enough fighter to get you over the hump. Matt Mitrione had a decent run in the UFC, but you knew what fighter you're going to get. A great athlete, but kind of green in his skill level. Fedor is older than most people who watch this, I'm assuming. He's probably older than a lot of your guys' dads. Czech Congo, that was a weird fight. Nemkov, he got beat. My only point is that I just don't know if Ryan Bader's been this completely rejuvenated fighter over Bellator. I still think he's going to go for the same kind of takedowns. I still think he's going to be vulnerable to the same kind of shots. My only difference is that I don't know if Machida has the reaction time to catch Bader like he once was able to. I still think the holes are going to be open. I still think Machida might be able to crack Bader. I just don't know if he has the power at this age to really hurt Bader like he once did.
Lyoto Machida is one of those guys, and you have to liken them to the greats that never get to show off their other talents. Anderson Silva, such a good striker. How good's his ground game? Conor McGregor, such a good striker. Oh, his grappling's great. His wrestling's not that good. But I look at Machida and kind of some of the wrinkles that he's been able to add into his game. If you look over on the Instagram, and you got to kind of pick and choose a little bit, because most of it is Machida karate. You see Shinzo in there a little bit. You see Machida's father, and that's all well and good. And then you get the little posts that are here and there. And he's been training at Fusion XL with Jacare Souza. Adolfo Vieira trains there. Former enforcer in the minor leagues, Matt Scroy, is a coach there. But there's a lot of good grapplers over at that gym, and some guys that can wrestle too. And I mean, listen, Adolfo's cardio's bad and Jacare's shot at this point, but they're both guys that could wrestle into the grappling. I really find that interesting as a wrinkle where Machida's going to train with guys like that to get ready for a guy like Bader. I'm interested to see if we get grappler Machida. We probably get striking Machida. We probably get average, everyday Machida. But there's so many different talking points to the rematch where I don't think it goes similar to the first fight.
No, I agree 100%. I think Ryan Bader knocks out Lyoto Machida. I do. Here's my problem. If Ryan Bader wins this fight, it doesn't prove anything to me about his run. I need to see him fight Nemkov again. That's my problem. I think Vadim Nemkov, and I'll play my hand right now, I think he's by far the best fighter in this tournament. I really do. And I think he's got youth on his side. He's got athleticism, the counter wrestling, and his striking is very, very good. He is my favorite to win this tournament. So when I look at everyone else in the tournament, it's what can you do to prove to me that you can beat Vadim Nemkov? So if Ryan Bader does come out, and let's say goes really wrestling heavy from the beginning, takes down Lyoto Machida and elbows him on the ground like Yoel Romero did to him in the third round, then yeah, we're seeing this new aggressive Ryan Bader. But if he just goes out there, single legs Machida, takes him down for 3 rounds, and beats Lyoto Machida in a somewhat predictable way, then I still don't think Ryan Bader's going to move all that far in this tournament, and I think there's going to be other fighters out there who can beat him.
To me, a minus 308 scares me away from Ryan Bader. You see him get knocked out in his last one. Could Lyoto Machida hit him with a counter shot? Really cause him a lot of issues, switching stances as well. 100% he could. And again, Chael Sonnen with the lazy takedowns, Lyoto Machida with those crazy knees up the middle, boom, boom, and Machida's out, Bader's out. But yeah, you talk about this overall landscape, and I mean, really interesting guy kind of sliding in. You've got that Dovletsanya Shimuradov fight against Beastin 25-8, Corey Anderson. Nemkov's got his hands full. There's a lot of great fights in this tournament, and I can't wait to see what happens on Friday between Bader and Machida. But I'm in agreement with you. I will ever so slightly, and it might sound silly because of the odds, but I will ever so slightly side with Bader, but I would not have this one on my card. I love the fight, though. I mean, 2 guys that have been in the sport for a very long time, UFC guys, Bellator guys, former champions in the organizations. It should be a great fight. Make sure you're checking out Bellator 256. And if you're just hanging around for the predictions, that's cool. But make sure you check out This Week in MMA. We got a lot more to talk about with Bellator 256. And as we always say, Matt, with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Really interested in our newest segment to the show. This one's called MMA Landscaping. It debuted last week, and we're going to be talking news and tidbits that you might not have seen, that it will be outside of the UFC and outside of the realms of what we normally talk about with Fight Night Picks on all of the various programs. But we will start this week with a little bit of breaking news, and it does pertain to the UFC. Now, it was first put out by Brett Okamoto with ESPN, but we have the tweet out from friend of the show, Marcel Dorf. The fight in question at welterweight. Couple of guys that you know and love. The Haitian sensation, Neil Magny, taking on Hands of Steel, Jeff Neal. Couple of guys coming off of big losses and main event opportunities. It'll be interesting to see what we get out of both of these guys. I love the matchup. I love it on paper. What are you thinking about this?
I think it's a great fight. I really do. And if you'll remember, this fight was originally booked in the fall of last year. And then injuries, of course, had that falling out. I'm really excited for the rematch because we saw Jeff Neal finally fight one of those upper echelon guys in Wonderboy in his last time out. And he wasn't able to get over that hurdle. But we've seen other prospects struggle with Wonderboy. Vicente Luque, who's all the hotness right now. Don't want to say I'm the conductor of the hype train, but I am. He lost to Wonderboy, and now look at him. He reinvented himself. He got better because of it, and now he looks like a different fighter. Jeff Neal might come back, retool, and look like a much more improved fighter. And for Neil Magny, Here's the thing. I just love it when we see ranked fighters fighting ranked fighters. It seems like every time a fighter finally gets ranked, then they're, I'm just going to save my spot. I only want to fight guys ahead of me. Two guys coming off losses, and this is going to be a fight that's going to test both guys. I'm a big fan of this booking.
Should be a great one. I love it too. I mean, if you look at what Neil Magny can do so well, he's kind of a jack of all trades unless he fights Michael Chiesa. And for Jeff Neal, he's such a good striker unless he fights one of the best strikers we've seen in the welterweight division. So I really do love the matchup. It should be a good one. And if we throw it on over to another bit of news that was announced today, the fight is, and another one by Brett Okamoto, Macy Barber is going to be taking on Miranda Maverick. And this is a weird one. It's so weird.
This fight is the definition of that meme where it's the one mom playing in the pool with a kid and the other kid kind of drowning. So the kid that they're playing with is Miranda Maverick. She's the new
Don't say
hotness
that
right
again.
now.
Yikes.
The kid in the pool is Macy Barber. She's struggling right now because she is coming off 2 major losses against Alexa Grasso and Paige Van Zandt is at the bottom of the ocean, just wishing she could get some publicity now. I think this is a great
Why are you
fight.
talking about a feeling?
Oh my goodness. I think this is a really good fight. I do. It sucks for Macy Barber because you have a fighter coming off 2 consecutive losses and a major injury, just now getting a really hard matchup and really a tough test because you gotta remember, Macy Barber was in that kind of Sage Northcutt area, if you will, for prospect hype. She had beaten a lot of great fighters, and then she finally got her veteran test, if you will. Great. She finally fought Roxanne Modafferi. Listen, you say really excited for this show a lot and you're not truthful about it. I can say Macy Barber went on a run. She loses to Roxanne, suffers that really bad injury, and then, of course, she comes back. She gets that fight against Grasso, which stylistically was a pretty good fight for Macy Barber. Ends up losing that one, too. So for Barber, I don't really know where she goes from here. You're giving a prospect not really the opportunity to lose a fight and then come back and look better. You're just giving her hard fight after hard fight, and you're not really giving Macy Barber the opportunity to grow because of this. If she loses to Miranda Maverick, it's probably goodbye to Macy Barber, maybe a hello to Bellator, maybe a hello to Invicta. Then we might see her develop her skills, but for right now, if I'm Macy Barber, I'm pretty frustrated with the UFC and how they treated me throughout my last 3 fights.
I mean, you put pen to paper, you agreed to it, so she only has herself to blame.
No, I understand, but when we talk about fighters being put in positions where they can't succeed, look at Tyron Woodley, a former favorite of you. He didn't want to fight Vicente Luque. He just lost 3 fights in a row, and someone had to fight Luque. Macy Barber was put in a very similar position. She can't turn down a fight. She's lost 2 in a row. They're making her fight Miranda Maverick, and they realize, hey, if Maverick beats Barber, well, we have all these highlight films from Barber. We can really make her look like she still is this big pumped up prospect and just feed her to Miranda Maverick. So for me, I don't think they're really putting Barber in a position to succeed.
I mean, if you look at Maverick in her last fight, it was against former common opponent of both of these fighters, Jillian Robertson, and Maverick struggled in certain areas, but overall she did a great job getting out of really bad positions. She totally outstruck Robertson when it was on the feet. This one has all the makings of a good fight, but you're right, 2 losses in a row to 2 wins in the UFC, and you look at the one against Joe Jua, and maybe the stoppage was premature between rounds, but still, it was the way that Maverick put it on. So I do love the fight. I love the show. It's an awesome show. I'm glad to be back. There's just sometimes that it's tough to get up for fights like Talita Nogueira and Jessica Borga on this week's Bellator card. But Matt, let's flip it over to Bellator 256, and we have an awesome card actually coming up this Friday. And again, maybe there's some fights on here like Nogueira Borga, which is buried on the prelims. Nogueira, former top prospect, title challenger. There's some fights that might fall under the radar. Jalen Bates fighting Jeffrey Glossner. But there are some really good ones from the bottom up. But if we work our way down, we've already previewed and profiled Bader and Machida. We've already talked about the co-main event between Carmouche and a really tough out in Vanessa Porto. Jeremy Kennedy, Adam Boric might be the fight that you're not focusing on this week that you need to. This fight rivals some of the fights you have on this upcoming UFC card. And listen, there's 15 of them to choose from. Some of them have to be good. Kennedy, Boric could be on the main card of that one, and I wouldn't bat an eye.
We don't do Fight of the Nights for Bellator, but if we did, this would be the pick hands down without a doubt. You have fellow Canadian Jeremy Kennedy, JBC Junior Bacon Cheeseburger himself, fighting Adam Boric. No one bought more Adam Boric stock than me. I was like those people on Reddit when they figured out those hedge fund guys were pumping money into GameStop. I was buying GameStop, only the GameStop turned into Adam Boric, and he didn't turn into the fighter I thought he was going to be. But this is a really fun fight because I think we can both agree. Jeremy Kennedy, just a perfect well-rounded martial artist. He's good at everything. He's got good wrestling. He's got good jiu-jitsu, good stand-up. There are some areas where he struggles, don't get me wrong.
Striking.
But even his striking, I wouldn't say is poor by any means. He is just a good jack of all trades. Now, of course, top position, ground and pound, that's where Jeremy Kennedy's at his best. Adam Borch, kind of the opposite. He's got good defensive submissions, great Muay Thai on the feet, but the wrestling can be a bit of an issue. So I think we are in for an absolute classic in this fight. I really do. And I don't think this is a fight where we're going to see one-way traffic either way. I don't think Adam Borch is going to go in there, one-punch Jeremy Kennedy, and that's the fight. And I don't think Kennedy's going to secure the first takedown, ground and pound Borch for a minute, and that'll be it. I think we're going to get 15 minutes of a very fun fight between these two.
And the interesting thing about this, for Kennedy, he got released from the UFC after one loss
to Volkanovski,
which to me was silly. He loses a fight with the PFL in his introduction. He has that weird fight against Daniel Pineda that was overturned because Pineda was a little bit of a juicy boy. And then he comes over with Bellator and kind of blew the doors off Matt Bessette. And it was one of those ones where it's in Connecticut, kind of a hometown type of feel for Bessette, the New Englander. For Adam Borch, you look at the 5-on in, you got the one loss in the middle. He beats Aaron Pico and finishes him. He finishes former champ Pat Curran. He loses to Darian Caldwell, but that was like a real test. Like, there's the former champ from 35. He beats Mike Hamill by split, and he beats Eric Sanchez. The weird thing is, huge favorite against Mike Hamill, and that fight, again, he wins it by split decision. I had it 29-28 Hamill. You saw what Hamill could do against Usman Nurmagomedov last week, where he's just continues to pump and move forward, and his nickname's Magic Mike. But he got a really good win his last time out against Eric Sanchez in a fight he should have won. So this one, yeah, you're right. This is an awesome one. This is like fight of the week. I love it. You got Kat Zingano taking on former Invicta fighter Olivia Parker on this main card. Can Kat Zingano kind of keep the tide turning? She had a win in her Bellator debut. That's an interesting one.
I don't know if I ever want to see Kat Zingano fight Chris Cyborg. That's the only hesitation I have, because when you do look at some of the fighters kind of on their way up, if you will, to title or to challenge against Chris Cyborg, okay, we can see the Julia Budd rematch. The first fight wasn't terrible, but Budd was definitely outmatched in that one. And then you could see Kat Zingano. Personally, I am really excited for that Leslie Smith Cyborg fight. Yeah. I know Leslie Smith got knocked out in their first fight, but Leslie Smith, if not anything, is durable. She's the definition of a scrappy fighter. A lot of volume out of Smith too. But when you do look towards other fighters, if Olivia Parker beats Kat Zingano, I really doubt they do Olivia Parker at 5-1 against Chris Cyborg. Just kind of hard for a fighter so inexperienced. But for Kat Zingano, she had that bad run to end her UFC career. Didn't really go that well for her. Not that she was losing to bad fighters by any means.
That Anderson one was a weird one.
And the Anderson one was weird too. But she definitely wasn't on the best stretch of her career. Juliana Pena was able to out-grapple her. But for Zingano, it really only is, do I fight Budd next or do I fight Cyborg? So hopefully if she is able to get the win, we do see her in one of those marquee fights against one of those big names. Just personally, I'm at the point now where I don't really know if Kat Zingano can make the improvements to beat Chris Cyborg.
We'll have to see what happened. Our main card, it kicks off with UFC vet Dan Moret taking on one of the most interesting fighters to watch, Gyota Yamauchi. And listen, I was so excited for Yamauchi's last fight. He was supposed to take on Nate Andrews, who has a big fight that was just announced. Gyota Yamauchi weighed in one big time amount over the weight limit, and I wrote it down here. It was 162.8 at lightweight. This fight against Dan Moret is booked at lightweight, and I'm surprised that for a guy that's so outspoken, and he gave a hard time to a big promotional vet not that long ago, Mike Mazzulli, that you'd even allow Yamauchi to try again at lightweight here.
I love Gyota Yamauchi, I gotta be honest. I'd watch him fight at any weight. I don't care that this is probably gonna be a 160-pound catchweight by the time we finally get to the fight. If I'm Gyota Yamauchi, I'm calling Charles Oliveira every other day like, hey, you do everything I do but better. I can teach you how to beat Michael Chandler. Because Gyota Yamauchi, he didn't beat Chandler. He got beat quite bad by him. But he does a lot of what Charles Oliveira does. If you just watch silhouettes of them, they're similar fighters. So if you are a fan of Charles Oliveira and you haven't had the chance to watch Yamauchi fight, I highly recommend it. Very tall, kind of karate stance, very kick-heavy on the feet. I wouldn't say his striking similar to a Ryan Hall, because I do think his striking is much more powerful. There's a lot of oomph behind Gyota Yamauchi's shots. But yeah, even just go back and watch his fight against Chandler. Rocks him with a crescent kick to the head and then cracks him again against the cage. He also got ground and pounded a lot in that fight. But he put a very good account of himself against one of the best fighters in the world. But I do agree with you. For Yamauchi, I'm excited to see him fight, but I've got to see him make weight. That's the most important thing after that last big miss.
Yeah, and again, I am really surprised that Mazzulli's letting it go. And for Dan Moret, you look at some of the wins. I mean, Jordan Griffin, he's got a fight in the UFC. That lends credence to the losses. Luke Sanders, Bobby Moffett, Johnny Barcelos, and then in the UFC, Gilbert Burns, Great White, Alex White, and Jared Gordon. all of the losses are to guys that either are in or have been in the UFC. And again, wins over Alex Gilpin, a guy that fought Lance Palmer 3 times in the PFL in a season.
Alex White's tough.
Dan Moret, though, I mean, really interesting to see him kind of coming back, major promotion here, getting a bit of a push. Our featured prelim, you have Tony Johnson fighting Dalton Rasta. Listen, Bellator likes to hype some prospects. Dalton Ross is only 4 fights into his pro career, but he's decimated everybody he's fought. He's had some really colorful characters in his corner before. For Tony Johnson, he beat the tar out of Joe Schilling in his last fight. I love this one here.
Tony Johnson just putting on crazy fights for the man who smokes cigarettes and kickboxes. That's the weird thing about Bellator. Their prelims will sometimes be oddly stacked, and then sometimes the prelims can be barren, but I do think this is one of the cards where they are stacked, and with Tony Johnson, I don't know if he is going to be a big-time prospect by any means, but I do like the way that Bellator is kind of bringing him up, if you will. A win over Joe Schilling means something. It really does, and yes, to the hardcores, the aficionados of the sport, maybe we don't see Joe Schilling as that top-tier UFC or MMA fighter, I should say, but still, beating him is a really good win, and then seeing the way that he's been able to progress since then, just a really great fighter.
Another one on these prelims, you have Cass Bell, the Mean Green Fighting Machine, taking on Jornel A1 Lugo. These guys are ranked bantamweights, and maybe you haven't heard of them. I have a bit of a tangent here. For Jornel Lugo, I remember talking to a friend of the show and member of Loudmouth MMA and Sherdog, Keith Schillen, and he was sitting around in the lobby of the Mohegan Sun in Uncasville, just sitting there minding his own business, and Jornel Lugo walked up to him and kind of tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you an MMA media guy? I recognize you." And Keith said, "Yeah." He goes, "Would you interview me?" And Keith was blown away. I mean, it's very rare that a fighter would kind of do something like that. And I love to hear it. And if you listen to Jornel Lugo, speaks incredibly well, just such a happy guy and a great guy to have around the sport. 5-0, the win for me that won me over with Jornel Lugo. And I went, you know what? This guy really could have something early on. Was win over John Duma, who's also on these prelims, who had a win over Mike Kimball, and that was a big one. But Jornel Lugo, his last time out, he didn't really impress me. It was about 3 months ago. He fought Shiler Sutho. It was a decent decision win for Cass Bell, submission specialist. And this guy's ground game is slick. It's just unfortunate the last time out, they had him at 5-0 fighting Ralphion Stotts. Like, that was a mismatch.
They did no favors to him whatsoever. And Ralphion is one of the more exciting prospects, I would say, in Bellator right now. Only career loss
He's a prospect?
I guess, but only lost to Merab Dvalishvili. Like, he's been there and done that.
Blew Keith Lee out of the waters
and
last
Keith
time
Lee's
out.
fighting a ranked fighter in his next fight in Henry Corrales. So, like, that tells you how good Stotts is. So, losing to him in your 6th professional fight, there is no shame in that whatsoever.
Great fight there. Again, interview that we have on the channel. Nathan Grieve, 2-0. Finisher, if you've ever seen one, taking on Cody Law. Super wrestling prospect. I'm looking forward to that one. And then the other fight that I wanted to talk about, and this one's going to fall way off the map. Tara Graf is a fighter that I know a lot of people have heard of in the past. And you look at it, yeah, she's got a loss of Valerie Lareda from back in 2020. That's why you know her. She was 1-1 going into that fight. She's fighting a little-known Russian fighter. And I say little-known, Pantera, Diana Avsaragova. She's 2-0, and if you look at the fight she's won, they were both against fighters that had never fought before.
We call that the Kerry Melendez, where I come from.
She has over 150,000 Instagram followers. This is another Bellator hype beast that you're going to see. Diana Avsaragova, you're going to hear about her later on. Bellator 256, it's a big-time card. I'm looking forward to it.
Pantera.
Make sure you're there for the prelims. If you're in Canada, who the hell knows where they're going to be. They were on YouTube last week. They're going to be on YouTube this week. Hopefully we get a broadcast partner up here. If you're in the States, they're over on Showtime. But I love the card, Matt. It's a great one. MMA Landscaping. The other things that I wanted to just throw out there, news and notes. Hex Fight Series. Rob Wilkinson with a big fight. You know that name because he lost 2 fights in the UFC.
My boy, CR Bahadurzada.
CR Bahadurzada, and then Israel Adesanya. He went back, retooled, did a little bit of Muay Thai and some kickboxing, won a fight a couple of years ago in 2019. He's got a fight for their light heavyweight title against Daniel Almeida. You also have big ACA card out there, ACA 121, and you have AMC Fight Night 100. Couple of title fights there and a lot of big prospects over across the way. So a lot of MMA to digest this week. As we're filming right now, we have one championship going on in the background, one on TNT, one. I mean, Demetrius Johnson, Adriano Moraes, that's a huge fight. But
Eddie Alvarez.
Big things going on in MMA these days. MMA Landscape, and a lot of fun. And listen, this week in MMA, like we said, it's incredibly busy. We have a lot of highlights, big interviews here on the channel. You're looking forward to the fights this week. I know you are.
Oh, yeah, we've got a great UFC card, great Bellator card this week, too. And we're starting off that light heavyweight tournament. I know we're all excited for Rumble Johnson versus Yoel Romero. That's coming up a little bit later. But to kick things off, we have Lyoto the Dragon Machida taking on Ryan Darth Bader. Terrible nickname, Ryan. Hit us up if you want better names. Just Ryan Bader and Lyoto Machida, great fight. Of course, Kevin Holland stepping in on kind of short notice, but also he's been getting ready for what seems like a 10-week training camp because he did just fight Derek Brunson. Just a lot of great MMA content this week.
All kinds of great stuff. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. You can find the content, fightnightpicks.com, over on the social medias at Fight Night Picks. You can find me at Craig Allen FNP. Matt, as always, at Matt Allen FNP. We're loving it. We're getting back into this week in MMA. So Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.